Social Work Facebook page later. Dr. Rice, did you want to do any introductions or you want me to keep going?
No, I'm gonna get us started, but thank you, Dr. Granruth, and welcome everybody. I'm still working on the live stream. There might be a glitch there, but a recording will be made available to everybody, just to let you know. So welcome to the very first policy webinar for the 2024-2025 academic year. I'm the chair of the School of Social Work and also the coordinator of our Learning Institute, and in collaboration with our Center for Civic Responsibility and Leadership, it's my honor to welcome all of you to our very first policy webinar this fall semester, which is Supreme Court's ruling on people sleeping in public. I know that this will be an engaging conversation with our esteemed panelist and our amazing moderator, who I also have the pleasure of introducing, Dr. Laura Brierton Granruth, who joined the faculty at Millersville University in August of 2013 after teaching in other social work programs in Virginia and Washington, D.C. She earned her BA in sociology from Fordham University, her MSW from Virginia Commonwealth University, and her PhD in social work from the National Catholic School of Social Services at the Catholic University of America. Her dissertation examined the impact of state tax code progressivity on children's health, education, and poverty outcomes. Dr. Granruth teaches across the curriculum at Millersville University. She currently serves as the MSW program coordinator, and she coordinates the Center for Civic Responsibility and Leadership. So it's my honor to introduce Dr. Granruth and hand it over to her.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. I am actually going to stop sharing my screen right now because I need to pivot to another piece of paper so I can read our bios on our panelists, she says as she goes looking for it right now. We had all these things that we were doing in the background, and now I'm like, where did I put it? So 1 second, please. It just figures. Hold on, please. So we do have with us Representative Smith-Waddell, and always just so exciting. And we appreciate your being here and everything that you're doing already. The representative comes to the state government out of a position with after being in Lancaster City government. And what was it until about 2017, I believe. So I'm getting back to our bios momentarily, and I'll be able to at least read this a little bit more like it makes sense. Had it open, and I moved away from it. Okay, so we'll do it for real. Prior to his election to the Pennsylvania legislature, Ismail Izzy Smith-Waddell was the president of Lancaster City Council, on which he had served since 2017. During his 4 years on the council, Izzy helped secure the largest investments in affordable housing and led removal for the city of Lancaster in its history. He championed the decriminalization of cannabis, a completely revamped use of force policy for police officers, and increased police accountability in response to community requests. Izzy was born and raised in Lancaster. After graduating from Carnegie Mellon University, Izzy returned to his hometown and began working in Lancaster's nonprofit sector to deliver relief to vulnerable people, first in behavioral health and drug and alcohol rehabilitation, then as a grant writer and researcher. As a program specialist at the Lancaster County Homeless Coalition, he coordinated services and support for Lancaster County's housing insecure community. Most recently, Izzy launched Refresh Lancaster, a mobile hygiene unit which delivers showers, social services, and medical attention to homeless Lancastrians. Izzy is the first Black and first queer state representative from Lancaster. His inspiration for his life and work as a public servant is the example of his mother, Rita Smith-Waddell, who is a professor at Millersville University and very dear to many of us. Representative Izzy advocates for legislation that puts power to the shared values of kindness, welcome, dignity, and care. Our second panelist is Dr. Jennifer Frank. Dr. Jennifer Frank is an associate professor in the Millersville University School of Social Work. Jennifer holds a PhD in social work from the Bryn Mawr College Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. a licensed social worker in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Her research, teaching, and practice interests are in poverty and homelessness. In 2022, Dr. Frank was named Social Work Educator of the Year by NASW of Pennsylvania. Further, in the fall of 23, she received an EPIC Award for her commitment to public university as demonstrated by her community work. That's a university award. Dr. Frank is a research fellow with the Millersville University Center for Public Scholarship and Social Change. Most recently with the center, Dr. Frank and her team published a community research report about unsheltered homelessness called People and Places, Community Need and the Use of Public Spaces in Binns Park. This report was based on 18 months of local community data collection and analysis. Based on her research findings, that those with the closest relationships with individuals experiencing homelessness have a people rather than a place as their primary focus, she established the Grassroots Advocacy Circle. The Grassroots Advocacy Circle is a small group of community partners who collaborate on people-focused community advocacy regarding homelessness and the needs of our unsheltered neighbors. Dr. Frank is a member of the Hunger Free Campus Task Force, which attends to student food insecurity, and the Family Friendly Campus Task Force, which helps support students who are parents. And our third panelist is Kristen Labezius. Kristen has been a social worker in Lancaster County since graduating from Bloomsburg University in 1992. Her career began as a program director at EARS, the Vocational Rehabilitation Center for Adults. Her career has primarily focused on adults with mental health concerns as a case manager and a supervisor for CSG, Community Services Group, for 28 years. Of those 28 years, 18 were also spent as an outreach worker for those who are unhoused in Lancaster County. Currently, she is a community health resource coordinator for Union Community Care, where she continues to work with our county's unhoused population, as well as many other populations within our community. During her years in the field, she has been on several boards, including Arch Street Center, Mental Health America Lancaster, Revolution Lancaster, which is a company made up of unhoused women that make beautiful jewelry and gain work experience, and has been a speaker for training for the crisis intervention team on unhoused resources in Lancaster County. Kristen is a member of the community engagement team of the Coalition to End Homelessness and the Continuum of Care Network of homeless service providers. So welcome to all three of you. As I mentioned in my email, and actually, so now there are about 40, oh, you got some hand claps going on there in the Zoom. As I mentioned in my email to you, I would like to go to each of you for 1 to 2 minutes of just kind of giving a hello, and then maybe hit the highlights of something you want to talk about. And then we'll go back and forth with conversation. For our attendees, you will see that there is a Q&A box, and then you can put your questions in there. And so to the anonymous attendee, you are muted and camera off because it's a webinar, and that's the way we run this one. And the recording will be available later through the School of Social Work and on our Facebook page. So I guess we'll start with, and I have so much trouble calling you Izzy at times. It just seems like too informal. So now I'm like, people have moved up onto Rep Izzy. So Rep Izzy, as the elected official on the panel here, let me start with you because I also know you recently called that hearing together. Mm-hmm. And if you would like to say hello to the attendees and just maybe give a set of 1 to 2 minute of where you're coming from on this issue on the grants pass decision and sleeping in public.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Granruth. So, hey, everybody, State Rep Izzy Smith-Waddell. I represent the 49th District, and I'm confronting the fact that I'm having a bad hair day live on camera with the rest of you. But I represent the 49th District, which is the southern half of Lancaster City, Lancaster Township and the borough of Millersville. So the university itself is in my district. So I come to this work while I was on city council. I also worked for the Lancaster County Homelessness Coalition. And I think there's two things that I most want people to understand. I'm going to take slightly more than 2 sentences, and I apologize in advance. Thing one is I want to set the legal background. I'm not a lawyer, but the Grants Pass, what it essentially does is overturns the precedent set by a case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit Court's geography is basically the Pacific Coast states, and sort of one bar of states inward. So you're talking about California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, etc. And that case held essentially the following: that if there's no shelter to be offered in a given community or within a given municipality, for that municipality's government to enforce a ban on public sleeping against a person who is unhoused, who specifically has nowhere else to go when there are no shelter options, constitutes the criminalization of homelessness. Now, how does that rise to the level of the Constitution? It's generally held through decades of jurisprudence that a crime against someone's status, or sorry, that punishment for status or identity constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. So it's deemed that punishing someone for their status as an unhoused person, that is to say, for sleeping outside, when there is no option locally for them to not sleep outside, violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. And it's not the existence of the law. In both cases, they're quite specific that what they're talking about is the enforcement of the law under the condition where there are no available shelter beds or low barrier housing options. And so the Grants Pass decision overturned that, and that's the environment in which we're talking. The other thing I want you to know is, just because I'm on a roll with this
Yeah.
this couple of weeks, there is a narrative, and I want people to understand this, especially as more and more folks are being more regularly removed from Binns Park and Colleton Park, or however you want to describe that. There is a narrative in parts of the county that are not Lancaster City, that unhoused people are coming from the city and going to all parts of the county, and this is sort of recognized as a problem. First and foremost, I think we should reject the frame of other human beings as a problem. But also, I want to let you know, part of my work for the County Homelessness Coalition was doing the rolls at our emergency shelters in Lancaster City. And so I could see the last permanent addresses of folks. And what that actually bore out is that many of the municipalities in our county are actively hostile to people when they lose their housing, which drives them into the city where there are more social services and more opportunities for them to rest. Which is not to say to point blame at the county or the city, but that we really have to tackle this as a whole locality, or otherwise we're just playing hot potato with people's lives. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Rep. Izzy, Representative Smith-Waydell, for that opening and setting the context. Let me go to Kristen next. And Kristen, if you want to unmute yourself and then just say, you can pick up on what Izzy said in part of your introduction, or if you had something that you wanted to say about things we should talk about today. And again, to the participants, if you want to put a question or a comment in the Q&A, please feel free to do that. The panelists can see that, and I can see it. Kristen, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I do want to emphasize, just as a former outreach worker, how this impacts our abilities to walk beside the individuals that are unhoused, and how it's a barrier to us actually providing them with the help that society keeps saying they need. Because my focus is from the mental health background, a large part of what I did was walk beside people to get them into treatment, to get them connected with the mental health services to help move them forward, getting them therapy, psychiatry, getting them the insurance first and foremost. But what's very concerning is we as a community aren't providing a safe space where they can connect with these services. The outreach team is working overtime and then some, even more so than they were before, just trying to re-engage the individuals and find them and ensure that they are safe. There's just so many layers to this that I think we'll only get to touch a few of them in the hour
Right.
that we have, so I'll keep this short. But my main focus is really the barriers for those of us that are trying to make those connections with the unhoused. And just where that leaves all of us as a
Terrific.
community.
Thank you. And again, to the panelists, you are able to put resources in the chat. You can use that, and our attendees would see that if something comes up that you want to share with them. And to my work BFF, Dr. Jennifer Frank, Dr. Frank, if you want to just say hello, and if there's some sort of context that you would want to put on our conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Granruth. Thank you for having me, Work BFF. I love this. Just to add a little bit to what these brilliant panelists have already said, I think when we look at what the Supreme Court has done with this grants pass decision, which, like Izzy had mentioned, it's overturning a lower court's decision that said it was cruel and unusual punishment to specifically target unhoused individuals, as long as there's no shelter beds available. I think we have to think about a couple things. When you read the way it was written, it actually talks about, and it goes to even the name of this webinar, about sleeping in public, about camping in public. The language in that is suggesting that we're not targeting someone's status as being unhoused. And I just think that that's a misnomer 100%, because if I have somewhere else to go, then I have somewhere else to go. But the way this decision is written is that even if there are no shelter beds available, that it's still not cruel and unusual punishment to target people who are sleeping outside. And they talk about it like camping, if I were sleeping and covering myself with a blanket. So it's wording it as though it's a behavior and not a situation where somebody has no choice. So the whole wording of it is off. I actually was one of the 57 social scientists that signed on to an amicus brief that provided all kinds of background and was heavily cited by Associate Justice Sotomayor in the dissent on this decision, citing all kinds of problems with this, because I really do believe that it does target people for the status of being unsheltered. And what it does is it causes more harm than good. It actually gives people a reason to sweep encampments to make it look like we don't have a problem with homelessness, because homelessness is the result of extreme poverty. It's what happens when we don't take care of all of our citizens, specifically the lowest income renters. And we do these encampment sweeps, which makes it very difficult for outreach workers to find people, to get them connected with resources. It makes the rest of the population think we don't have a problem with unsheltered homelessness, and we don't have poverty in our community because it looks clean and pristine. It also causes harm because we're denying people the ability to sleep, which is torture. And even the United Nations says that denying people sleeping is a form of torture, and giving people citations and jail time because they have nowhere to go is cruel and unusual punishment. And it actually adds insult to injury and creates more barriers to getting them treatment and housing anyway, with fines and jail time and all of the yucky stuff that goes with that. I think if we want to solve homelessness, we need to change the conditions, the societal conditions that generated in the first place. And I'll stop there because I could
Thank
talk.
you, Dr. Frank, but I'm going to come back to you momentarily. So you can think a minute about, I want you to give like a 2-minute summary of like homelessness from the 1970s, or if we thought it was a recent issue or something. And then I'm going to, after your question, I'm going to go back to the representative with a question that's already in the chat about what does it mean if no shelter beds are available. And I did listen to the hearing that you had in terms of funding that was going on from the state and different things. And so I thought maybe then we could pivot to some of taking it from the history from Dr. Frank, and then going to the representative with what does it mean if no shelter beds are available, and tying that into what the state is doing regarding funding in the local area. So tell us about the history of Hobohemia.
Oh, so Hobohemia is going to go back to really the New Deal era. But when we think about homelessness, we call modern homelessness like the new face of homelessness, which really emerged in the early 1980s. Of course, people lost their housing prior to that, but it wasn't considered a special kind of person, and there wasn't a social service system directly targeting people because of their housing status. Homelessness before that was like what happened if you were super poor, you lost your housing. And it was kind of tied into poverty like that. So if you look mid-century, we have like in the 1950s, the depopulation of the mental health, the state hospital. And a lot of people think, oh, that's what caused homelessness. But actually, you know, it's a combination of things because people didn't really show up homeless in the 1960s. It wasn't until the early 80s that we have massive homelessness on the street. What happened in the in-between there was that we lost all kinds of very low-income housing, including SRO units, so single room occupancy, all of that. And the combination of all those things generated massive homelessness in the 1980s and the first federal legislation on homelessness with the McKinney-Vento Act in 1987. And what that did was it funded services that were already dealing with homelessness in very disparate ways. Different charities, soup kitchens, religious organizations, and churches that were just doing this, that, and whatever they felt they wanted to do. And McKinney, in some ways, funded those kinds of things. And what it did, though, was create another social service system to deal specifically with homeless people. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because now it can be blamed when it doesn't fix it. And what other countries have done is have more collaboration and cooperation between already existing systems of care, hospitals, jails, prisons, education system, and all of that. So I think we need to really think more systemically about what causes homelessness, because homelessness is a housing problem. It's the lack of affordable housing. It's wages not keeping pace with housing. You say some people want to argue it's mental illness, it's substance abuse, all of those kinds of things, and we get into the chicken and the egg. But I think what really is happening is that people who have vulnerabilities like mental health issues and drugs and alcohol and different things like that are just more at risk of losing their housing due to the affordability crisis.
Thank you. And for continuation of that, I think for the students on the call, Dr. Frank has a course. When are we offering that course again?
So we're actually offering it in the spring, and it's called Hobohemia to Housing First, a critical reflection on homelessness in the United States. And it was highlighted on the National Center for Excellence in Homelessness Services website. It's a great course. So if you're interested, you can there in the spring.
So that's why with that focus, and then Kristen, after the representative, there's a question in the chat about how to become an outreach worker or what that kind of work is. But with what Dr. Frank was able to say about the history, and it's actually a shortage of space, of affordable housing. Can you talk a little bit, Representative, about the lack of shelter beds locally, and then maybe what the state is sort of doing with all those funding issues?
Yeah, so I'm seeing the question from Georgiana, does no shelter beds available mean that we have them, but they are full, or only that we don't have a shelter option in our community? Hold on. Pardon me.
Bless you.
Thank you. So it means the former, in short. Like, there are shelters, and so there are there are like longer term shelters, there are transitional housing opportunities, there are sort of emergency or low barrier shelters, and all of these exist in Lancaster County. But they are, every time I think anybody looks, they are full. So it's not a situation where you know, there's 10 beds in the emergency shelter, and actually, pardon me, a few months ago, we actually lost a large number of low barrier shelter beds. Hopefully, we're going to bring some more online in December, with the renovations being done to Otterbein Church in the northern half of the city, so that it can function in part as a low barrier shelter, but that's, you know, entirely reliant on construction timelines. So I cannot tell you for sure that we will have increased our number of low barrier shelter beds by the time the weather begins to get dangerously cold overnight again. I can't tell you that for sure. So and that is kind of always the challenge, because, and we like to think of them as like before the fact, but they're often after the fact. That is to say, the many challenges that our unhoused neighbors face. There's a lot of things that we take for granted in terms of like the physical structures that we live in, the things that we're able to do without harassment, and not having that security wears on, you know, your psychological health, your ability to engage with the social contract. Like, there is
Mhm.
actual damage done to your brain as a result of the trauma of being unhoused. And so we see people doing often is when we're like, oh, that person is problematic because they have a mental illness, or they have turned to alcohol or opioids, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Which I have another point there I'll come back to. But a lot of this we fail to understand is a result of homelessness, or the conditions that created the homelessness in the first place, not the other way around.
Mhm.
And so the other challenge that we have with our shelters is, if there's a shelter but you can't go to the shelter if you're not sober, but you developed a reliance on alcohol because while you were unhoused and very poor, you broke a bone and couldn't get adequate medical care for it. And so the only thing that you had to address that pain was some kind of substance. Now you are homeless because you're unable to get shelter because you are essentially trying to medicate a condition that you have in a system where your healing is dependent on how much money you have, and you're already unhoused. And so, you know, this is the challenge with like, you know, when you talk about like total shelter beds, you want to be aware of like what the condition of entry is for those shelter beds when you evaluate what is and isn't available. And the other thing that you have to evaluate is that the shelter system splits up families. We do not have like a good master way of keeping adult males, adult women, and children together in a congregate shelter setting. And so if you go and talk to a lot of our neighbors, particularly men that are unhoused, a fair number of them have girlfriends and kids. They have wives. There's a guy who showers at my gym at Planet Fitness, who goes there because, you know, that's where he can get a shower for $10 a month, and he can come up with that. But the things that like, I think the thing that is most striking to me about that, and I'll move off shelter in just a second, is, you know, like the political environment of the past 8 years. One of the things that we said was most harmful about our immigration system was that when people came here seeking a better life, that we like separated them from their families, we separated them from their children. But that's what we do with our unhoused neighbors, in the name of helping them, and we haven't really come up with a better solution. And so part of the danger, I think, of like calling everything the same quality or same
Yeah.
level of shelter bed is it sort of skates over the indignities that people have to face to access shelter in the first place. Okay. So I was asked to address, and I'll do this more briefly, what the state is doing. The short answer is not enough. But we do have a couple of wins in this year's budget, which include a $5 million increase to the homeless assistance program line item. This is actually the only dedicated funding that the state provides for unhoused people. That is to say, it's the only money that comes from Pennsylvania tax dollars and not, say, from an existing federal grant program. So that's thing one, in terms of direct service. Thing two that I think people ought to be aware of is, this is a little wonky, but the 1115 waiver pilot, the Department of Human Services has applied and is in negotiating an agreement with, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, allowing them to spend Medicaid dollars on housing supports. That could bring a lot of new money into the system, and it's pretty huge. One of the bigger, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
Oh, just one last thing. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
One of the bigger things that I am working on is the McKinney-Vento Act was mentioned. The McKinney-Vento Act, in addition to what Dr. Frank referred to, also provides a separate parallel definition for how we determine that a student and their family may be eligible for these kinds of services. You might hear them casually called homeless student services. In the school district of Lancaster, it's families in transition, what have you. And that definition is different, and it's broader. If the child and their family are living in conditions from which they can be immediately made homeless, they are also considered homeless. So like living with you and your two kids are living with your sister and her two kids in a 2-bedroom apartment, and the landlord could roll through and be like, nah, 3 of you have to get out. That child is eligible for McKinney-Vento dollars and McKinney-Vento services. So that got a big boost. Those funds got a big boost during the pandemic. Now, as we know, ARPA funds are going away. There are now fewer, basically zero ARPA funds. Our unhoused students are not going away. Best estimate from 2 years ago, almost certainly an undercount, 40,000 across the Commonwealth. And so there's a group of stakeholders asking for a dedicated line item for the state to invest over and above the federal investment through the Department of Education, school districts with large numbers of students who fit the McKinney-Vento eligibility. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Thank you. Lots of good information. So, but as I was listening, and because the question is about what is it like to be an outreach worker, maybe there could be some best practices. What does it take to be an outreach worker? And of course, Kristen, you've probably worked with a lot of new social workers over the years. Are they coming to you with the right kinds of education, training, and skill set? Because then we can always take it back into the university to see what's needed. So why don't you take a few minutes and talk about your career, because obviously it's been extensive with reaching out to people who are unhoused.
Well, let me first say that I always get excited when I see someone is a Millersville grad. And I had the privilege of working with grad students during their internships and doing some mentoring. And I will say Millersville University social work graduates are top notch. They definitely come prepared. And probably one of the most compassionate group of social workers, quite honestly. So as a hiring manager for many, many, many years, I can say that they definitely can step into the role of a community social worker pretty prepared. They have a really great outlook on the work that needs done. They come with boundaries that are needed to do this work. Boundaries are incredibly important when you're doing this work.
Can you say a little bit more about that? Because boundaries can sometimes sound, and also your own work. Before we started, there was a conversation going on about it has to be like, you really have to walk alongside someone and develop that relationship. So if you can talk about what you have done because you really said some really great things before we were live.
Well, thank you, Dr. Granruth. I will say that the most important piece of the work that you will do is walking along the people that you're working with. Relationship building, and this is where boundaries become important. People have different stances on what's okay to share, what's not okay to share. Honestly, when you're asking a person to tell you their utmost secrets and talk about where they've come from, I think it's okay to share a little bit about yourself. You're not going to give them your home number and address, but to let them know, hey, I'm married, I have 3 kids, you know, my kids are playing these sports. Talking about if you have lived experiences, a lot of the best social workers come from a background of lived experience. And that's what brings them into the field. And those are priceless when it comes to providing support to others and walking them through situations. I personally have not walked in a lot of the situations that the people that I've helped, but I see where they're at. I understand why they're where they're at. And I also know that they all deserve the chance to succeed in whatever path they choose. When I started, I came from the Housing First. It was the catch-all when I first started, and it works. When you can provide someone the safety of knowing where they're going to sleep, providing somewhere for them to go to the bathroom when they have to go. Nothing infuriates me more when I hear people complaining about, oh, they pooped in the bushes. Well, can you show me another alternative? And yes, I empathize with the city worker that goes out and has to clean said bushes. I've met with them over the years of being in outreach, and yes, it makes their job more difficult, and they certainly understand, but it also makes their jobs difficult. But if you can't provide a basic need, a bathroom is a basic need, a bed to sleep in is a basic need. It's no different than air or water, in my opinion. And building trust. Most of the individuals that you're going to see unhoused come from situations where they're not going to trust you right away. You need to earn that. And never, the best advice I can give is never overpromise something that you can't deliver. That's huge. Never say you can do something that you can't, because it just sets you up to fail them. And that breaks trust more than anything else. I can't tell you to walk beside someone, meet them where they're at, and to be beside them and see all the hoops that they have to jump through, to see that in order to get into a shelter, you have to have 3 months of proven therapy, and they need documentation from your therapies that show all the dates that you've connected, or that you need to be hospitalization free for 6 months, whatever the case may be. It's hard enough trying to stay safe and sleep with one eye open, let alone trying to get up in the morning and function enough to say, oh, I have 3 appointments today and I'm going to make it to every one of them. And it just doesn't work that way. And until you can provide someone with the stability, their forward movement and their ability to get the care and the treatment that they need is almost impossible. We've been very fortunate in the mental health world that we do have some programs that provide funding for housing for those that don't have an income or have an income of SSI only to help supplement them until they're able to get on their feet, and provide them the housing so that they can get the care that they need so that they can move forward in their recovery, whatever that may look like. And that looks very different for each and every individual. The importance of housing first and foremost, but you can't just take someone who has lived outside and may not have cooked for themselves for 5-10 years and put them in this cute little apartment and expect them to immediately be able to prepare meals, to know how to budget, to meal plan, to clean the apartment. You really need those wraparound services. They're as critical and as crucial as housing itself. And that is something that we definitely lack in our community, is those wraparound supports. As far as becoming a homeless outreach worker, we have some really fabulous agencies in Lancaster County. We need more. For the longest time, there were 2.5 of us serving the entire county. And actually, it was less than 1.5. We had a full-time worker at Tenfold. We had a 30-hour week at CSG, and we had me, who was designated like 10 hours a month. Well, you can't designate 10 hours a month when the need is so great and you have 70 hours to serve the whole county. We have been lucky enough that we have expanded our outreach services, but at the expense of losing shelter beds. And
Right.
I can tell you that homeless outreach workers cannot fill the gap of not having those shelter beds. We have an amazing team right now in Lancaster County. I couldn't be prouder of the work they do. But since they've been chased out of the city, there are so many more barriers and obstacles that they're having to overcome. Food insecurity. We eat well in Lancaster County, and I do say kudos to our local churches, to the meal programs that we have, Crispus Attic, Saka, and throughout the county. Honestly, if you're able to get to them, you still can go hungry in Lancaster County, and there are many that do. I don't want it to sound like these are the answers. But when you're unhoused and you don't have anywhere to sleep, and then you don't know where your next meal's coming from, because now you're displaced 10 miles from where your meals are. And how are you getting back into these meals 3 times a day? Because in between meals, you're being chased back out.
Yeah, I was
So,
actually going to mention that again, that talking about the extent of the problem, to refocus all of us and our attendees on the grants pass decision is doing what you just said, that it's criminalizing it. Maybe people who are unhoused are most visible in the city.
Mhm.
So now they're being chased and dispersed, which leads to the problem that you're seeing in various other parts of the county. So I just, because we're talking about that actual decision,
sorry,
I kind of,
yes.
oh, no. I was realizing that's what, all of a sudden I was like, let's make sure this is a policy decision that has made what was already a bad problem worse, because now folks are literally on the run
Mhm.
from various places if they stop
Yes.
moving.
And unfortunately, because of this new legislation, we are seeing municipalities within Lancaster County taking that and running with it and looking for any and every reason to put someone in cuffs. We had an individual in Columbia who was waiting for the bus and was approached by an officer and told they needed to move along because because of their state of unhoused, they needed to move on. And they were waiting at the bus stop and being harassed while
Yeah.
trying to get to their doctor's appointment in the city. We have outlying communities, northern Lancaster County, there's several communities that are incredibly unfriendly to our unhoused, that don't want them walking on the streets to get to the winter shelter when they have it, but asking them to go via alleyways
Oh my
so that
gosh.
they aren't seen by the community.
We don't want to
Um,
be disturbed. Yeah, don't please.
exactly.
So already we're at 12:45, so we're going to be
I'm
starting to
sorry.
wrap up in about 10 minutes. Or, but I wanted to pivot to some of the questions, or just at least call them out. Jamie Morris is talking about York City now seeing the same thing and looking for best practices, and we may not have an answer for her. And Aaron Zimmerman saying, "What else can we do?" And of course, if there are social workers on listening, that it's going to be about advocacy, not only doing the outreach, but writing to people like Rep. Izzy and Scott Martin and Ryan Alment and everybody else about what you want. But Dr. Frank, I know there was also something in there, and I don't know if some of those other questions that people were posing, that you wanted to talk about there was a question about the research that you wanted to get to. So
can
is
also
there,
answer
if,
some of these other ones too. I think that with Aaron's question, thanks, Aaron, about what should people do? We need to advocate. This is a macro problem. You don't solve homelessness with services. We need services, but when we hire more outreach workers and close all the shelter beds and no housing is available, what are the outreach workers supposed to do? They can connect people with what? We need to solve the homelessness problem, which is a housing affordability crisis. And I think what that means is we need to make housing affordable for people. Housing is a basic right. It should be seen as a human right. It's a basic need. We need to increase Section 8 vouchers that make housing affordable for people. We need to develop low-income housing, housing that's suitable for the lowest income renters in the community. And I think that what that's going to do is address this sort of elephant in the room about all of the investors that are coming in trying to flip houses, trying to Airbnb. I mean, I know people in my own circle that think it's a great idea to invest in housing, buy low, sell high. If you're going to buy low and sell high, you're going to buy housing in lower income neighborhoods and flip it and make it an Airbnb and make a bunch of money off of that. We need to look at that as a moral failure. That's a mess. We're dealing with people's livelihoods. I really think we need to address that housing like that. We need lower income housing for people, and that's how we have to handle that. So this is an advocacy thing for, I think, social workers, people want to get involved. Somebody asked in here, Georgiana, about are people better off in a central location, or does being scattered about in the city help them out or make them less likely to get assaulted and stuff? There's actually a lot of research that shows that sweeping encampments does harm. It separates people from their outreach worker. It separates people from their meals, from their services, from their belongings. A lot of times sweeps will come through and everyone's belongings get thrown away. So you have these well-meaning church people giving folks sleeping bags, and then the sleeping bags go into the dumpster. And then it's this cycle of sleeping bags to the dumpster. One study showed that, even people's durable medical equipment like walkers were getting thrown out, people's medications, people's birth certificates, social security cards. So sweeps are a hot mess. They're bad. And there's one study, a big study that showed that separating people from encampments in voluntary displacement can cause more deaths, increase in mortality up to 10 to 24% for people that are over a 10-year period. So sweeping encampments causes people to die. Okay, so it is much worse for people to be scattered about.
so can you drop the link to your testimony in the chat? If you
Please.
can find it. If not, we'll send it out later. Maybe do that, because there was a phrase that you used yesterday that or whenever you did I watched it last night, about the focus on people versus places. And you had a quote or something in your testimony that was about, like, if I'm a person in Lancaster and I just don't want to see the mess. So there's a reason that we put up that fence outside the city building. And it's how that is focusing on place versus people.
Okay, yep, I can definitely talk to that. So for those of you who are familiar, we did a little community-based report. It was 18 months of data collection. Students were involved. It's published. I can also put a link for this. It took a long time to collect all of that data. It's qualitative. We did interviews, we did surveys, we did observations. And when we analyzed the data, we found that there were some differences about how people defined the homelessness problem, the situation with homelessness. And it was very much related to the distance that they had between the problem and themselves.
That's what it was.
The closer that people were to knowing homeless folks by name, to seeing them as people, they were mostly concerned with the well-being of the folks and on the street. The more distance people had, like further removed, less likely to know people's names, they were more concerned about the quality of the public space. And so we have this dichotomy around people or place, which one's more important? And I think they're both important. But if we would actually address the causes of homelessness and get upstream and fix that, eventually we would solve both of these issues. We can have good spaces if people's needs are met. When we disperse encampments and we move people out, like if you're from Lancaster, the Binns Park area, has been historically a lot of homeless folks congregated in those areas. in part because there's a nice little roof overhang that can keep you protected from the elements. This summer, the county commissioner spent $107,000 and some change to put up a 3-foot fence, a 3-foot high fence. And if you know me, I'm only 5 foot tall, but I could get over it. Okay, so it's like a fence. And all that did was push people out from under the overhang. So it's like, what are we doing? And now people have been all moved out of Binns Park. We've dispersed it. So it looks like we don't have a problem. So the only thing sweeping encampments does is it allows the homeless, the housed folks to think we don't have a problem. And that's not going to help us with our empathy issue if we don't think there's a problem. So I do think we need to have interventions and policies that predominantly deal with people and looking at people's humanity, seeing people as our neighbors and other citizens and valuable members of the community, and how do we meet their needs?
Thank you, Dr.
Jen.
Rice. Dr. Rice, Dr. Frank, whoever you are. So Representative Izzy, we've heard a lot about different things that maybe could happen. And one of those being there's zoning, there's SROs, there's different ways, you know, all these different things. I mean, to give my age away, when I first moved to New York City, I could have chosen to move into an apartment building where there would have been like a mother hen, you know, overlooking, you know, when I was coming and going, and to make sure no characters got in or something. SROs have fallen out of fancy. People don't like them, you know, once we got past some things. Is there anything going on? We have any legislation on zoning? Are we hearing any talk about, can we restart it's like dormitories, right? We let students live in dorms and they mostly seem to be okay. About dormitory or SRO style living and zoning in the county or state.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things here, Dr. Granruth, and I think SROs, however you want to call it,
Right.
are a good solution. And also I am, and this is not directed at you, I'm always a little cautious when we go down this road, because some folks, you end up in a place of saying like, well, what we're going to do is assign a generally lower quality of housing to a particular category of folks in a permanent fashion. And also at the same time, like, you know, if you travel to Tokyo, Thailand, et cetera, you will find housing units, like people happily living in housing units that are just much smaller than we take for granted here in the United States. It's a big country, so goes either way. Anyway, the short answer is yes. There's legislation to address this. There's 2 bills in the House, 1 in the Senate, and the biggest barrier to them, honestly, is just that Pennsylvanians are provincial. Like, I don't want to like turn that back on the people, but really specifically, this is a state with 500 school districts, because everybody has to have their own school districts, and you know, elected officials are primarily accountable to their voters, and a majority of electeds have constituencies that one way or another want to maintain some level of community control over what housing is built. And I'll tell you, like West Hempfield Township, for example, through zoning law, has made it essentially illegal to build an apartment building, a duplex, a triplex, a quadplex. And it's one of the largest municipalities in the county, and you can't build any kind of housing that would be affordable there.
Wow.
And so you just have to get the legislature on board with overriding local control in zoning, which is a tall order. And I think the other thing to balance is some of that's zoning, but some of it's just money. We are in a decade where we have built less housing in this country than any decade since the 1950s. We're not building housing, much less the volume of affordable housing. And you can see it, you know, like a budget is a moral document. So I've talked about, and I answered a question to sort of say like, oh, here are all the cool things that we're doing. But the Public Housing Trust Fund, that's FAIR or PHFA, that's realty transfer tax money. It relies on houses being bought and sold. The amount of money that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invests in the construction of new affordable housing from its general fund is exactly $0. It's exactly zero. And it ought to be more on the order of, I said this in one of the questions here. We ought to be talking about $1 billion. And I know that's a big number, but it's actually still a big number, but it's actually about 2% of the annual budget of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so I think if we want to get serious, we both need to open up our land for the development of affordable housing, but also be investing in it in a serious way. And this might be a bridge. Some people get upset when I say this. Part of the problem is we don't build enough public housing, and we always build it low quality. There's
Yeah.
not model competition in the market against people who, like there was an ad for an apartment, like a sign posted for an apartment in Chestnut Hill, 1 bedroom with like a little crib room attached for $1,700, right? Like there's not a public option making sure that affordable quality housing is available in the market, and just the state, the county, whatever, should own more housing. Last year, 40% of all single family homes in the United States were bought by companies, not people.
Right.
Companies. And so like homes have become like a fancy certificate of deposit and not a place where people live. And so we have to invest in changing the entire paradigm if we're going to get upstream of people becoming unhoused.
Right. Thank you so much. I really wanted to, because you can see, I think we could talk about this for another hour. It goes so quickly. And so I hope we touched on all things. We had, what's happening locally policy wise, what could happen at the state policy wise, what some of the research is showing, what practitioners are doing with outreach. So I hope we touched on all of that enough, but we could have done more. And for you folks who are like under 40 or under 30, so I think it could also be the fact that we used the term affordable housing has always seemed to be applied to people who were poor, but it's you folks who have all your degrees and you can't afford a house because it's $250,000 and it's nothing. So I am going to go with Jen, if you can give a 1-minute wrap up, and then we'll go to Kristen, and then back to Representative Izzy to give final thoughts to our participants, and we will go from there.
I can't stop. So two things, affordable housing. They're putting affordable housing. If you remember, like South Queen Street, where Redmond's used to be, the way they marketed that in terms of affordable, I think it was 80% of median county income, which is that's not for poor people. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like we need lower income housing. And also Janae mentioned that we have a locker program. This is amazing. This is years in the works, and we need more stuff like that. So it's like for homeless folks to have somewhere to put their thing. I'm going to read from my remarks here to just close. Criminalizing homelessness gives political officials and the greater population the wrong idea about what homelessness is about. The reality is that homelessness can happen to anyone given the right mix of unfortunate events. In the end, the persistence of unsheltered homelessness is a policy choice, and the ways in which we treat our unhoused neighbors is also a policy choice. The criminalization of homelessness provided for by the Grants Pass decision worsens the homelessness problem, traumatizes those experiencing homelessness, extends bouts of homelessness, and increases the risk of mortality. So that's where
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Kristen.
Well, Dr. Frank, it's really hard to follow that. I just want to say that the passing of Grants Pass is really taking hold here in Lancaster County, and we need to be the voice to stand up to it. And we need to show our politicians that we are not okay with it, that everyone deserves the right to be treated as a human being. They are someone's family member, friend, uncle, aunt, and they deserve to be treated just like our politicians. We are no better than anyone else that we walk beside. And we need to stand up, be loud, take risks, and fight for what we know is the right way to help others. And I agree with Dr. Frank when she said we could have all the services in the world. It's just so much bigger than services. And we can make that change and we can make that difference, but we just need to keep fighting for what is right. And don't allow the politicians to frighten you, because they will. Just keep fighting for what is right. I commend all of you. Social work is an amazing career, and I couldn't dream of doing anything else. I didn't even go to school to be a social worker, which I regret now, but life experiences and just being there for the people that are most in need, fighting for those that are most marginalized, is really at the bare minimum of what we do as social workers, and we can't lose sight of that. So thank you all. Keep
Thank you.
fighting the good
Kristen,
fight.
do you have an email address, or if people want to join an advocacy group locally, could you put that in the chat? Is there a
Sure.
group that you would refer them to for follow-up to join for advocacy? Because we love that. And then Representative Izzy, if just a quick, wrap up there of what you would recommend to our participants.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristen probably remembers this. Several years ago, the county commissioners created an interdisciplinary team, quote unquote. They put 30 people in together, right? Those were some wild meetings.
I
you
was
know,
uninvited at one point.
Right. But the first meeting started with a high-ranking county official whom I will not name saying, over on top of Ewell Plaza, there's $1 million condo. Nobody wants to look out the window of their condo and see that, like saying the quiet part out loud. And so I think the place that we start with all of this is understanding that for the overwhelming majority of us, we are so much closer to the people who sleep or have slept in Binns Park than we will ever be to someone who owns $1 million condo. And that is actually also true for most of your local elected officials. And they need to be reminded of that. I think the thing that I'll close with is this: the governor just authorized the Department of Community and Economic Development to spend the next year developing a housing action plan, a proposed plan to take on housing and homelessness in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The governor ought to hear from you. The Department of Community and Economic Development ought to hear from you what you want to see in that plan, and that you're not going to tolerate like half a thing or a plan that doesn't involve the construction of new housing and provision for our unhoused neighbors. I know somebody mentioned in the questions, that's very true. A lot of times we write letters to our elected officials and it feels like they go into the wind. But I do think the housing action plan, now that elected officials have sort of collectively woken up about 10 years too late to the fact that there is a housing crisis,
Right.
is an opportunity to dive in and make your voice heard. I know that we will be, that is my office, will be doing the same. Susan, my chief of staff, will have me hung out to dry if I don't say this. Social workers are great. They make my office run. They make the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania run. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for looking out for our most vulnerable neighbors.
Thank you so much. May I just say, you can see we're 5 minutes over and we have lost almost no one from the call. So I really want to thank our attendees for this excellent panel. I think we really could have gone on. So thank you to our esteemed panelists for your words of wisdom. To our attendees, hopefully you were able to glean knowledge and or skills from today's webinar to jumpstart or continue your advocacy and practice working with those experiencing homelessness. You will see that there, whoops, I'm looking here. Please complete the evaluation that you'll see in the chat, because we love to get your feedback, and for some of you, you may need proof that you were here. We will follow up in a few days using your email address that you registered with to send you additional resources. So if our panelists have anything that they want to share, please send it back in. And that if you need the 1 hour ethics CE, please make sure you include that on your link. So again, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next one, which I think is in October. And oh wait, I'm supposed to have a slide. Let me just see what our next one, our closing slide is here. So hold on, coming right back. Figuring out how to share the screen again, right? So Wednesday, October 16th, and we're going to talk about student loan forgiveness. So you'll may get more emails from us. These are on our Learning Institute webpage. And believe it or not, give an early shout out that this student loan forgiveness actually appears as an issue in, wait for it, Project 2025. So we can make that connection there. And then in November, we'll talk about we'll correct the spelling of the intersection of environmental and social justice. So the policy webinars have gotten more and more popular. Love it. Representative, thank you for taking the time from your busy day. Really appreciate it. Kristen, pleasure to know you. I had people who were telling me that how wonderful you are, and I hope to meet you in person soon. So thank you for all the good outreach work. Really appreciate it. And to my work BFF, Dr. Frank, I don't know, maybe you'll have me over for dinner tonight or something.
Thank you, Dr. Granruth. It was nice meeting you today as well.
All right, you can log off whenever you are ready. So have a wonderful day. Be safe, everybody. Look at all those